The Paraná River flows quietly past the city of Rosario, Argentina, before merging with the waters of the Rio de la Plata. On its banks, in the mid-1980s, stood a working-class neighborhood nobody paid much attention to: Las Heras. Dusty streets, low-roofed houses, narrow courtyards where neighbors called out to one another in the evenings. In this neighborhood lived Jorge Horacio Messi, a foreman at a steel factory, and Celia Maria Cucitini, a woman who worked as a cleaner. Jorge was tough-looking but warm-hearted. He rose at 5 every morning and walked to the factory because there wasn't always money in the budget for the bus. Celia worked as a cleaner at a small textile plant in the neighborhood and cared for their 4 children in the evenings. In the early years of their marriage, they had 3 sons in quick succession: Rodrigo, Matias, and a third born a few years later. The family's 4th child was born at a local hospital on June 24, 1987. They named him Lionel Andres after Jorge's father, a kind of continuation of the family legacy. But within the family, there was a small detail that was never shared with the outside world. The night before the birth, Celia had a strange dream. Years later, she would tell it only to her closest relatives, a dream in which a child's feet gave off light. Coming from a family not particularly given to superstition, this dream was long dismissed with a smile. But every so often, especially on days when Leo did something extraordinary on the pitch, his grandmother Celia, yes, she shared a name with her own daughter-in-law, would watch him from the window and murmur, "That dream wasn't for nothing." Little Leo was the quietest child in the family. His older brothers, Rodrigo and Matias, were loud, energetic boys, always caught up in some street fight or a game somewhere. Leo, by contrast, usually sat in a corner, his eyes wide and curious, preferring to watch rather than talk. But the moment a ball touched his foot, that silence would vanish instantly. Before Leo had even turned one, the family noticed something strange. Even as he was learning to walk, he tried to drag a ball along behind him. Jorge, no matter how tired he was after a day at the factory, never once skipped playing ball with his sons in the dirt yard behind the house. This was the family's most sacred ritual, the few hours each evening when the day's exhaustion was forgotten and everyone laughed like children. By the time Leo turned 4, he was already playing with his brother's friends, despite being much smaller and slighter than they were. Even the older boys in the neighborhood grew reluctant to play against him, because when the ball was at his feet, it seemed to stick to him like a magnet. One neighbor would later recall in an interview, "That kid wasn't playing with the ball. It was like the ball was playing with him." But within the family, there was another mystery, rarely spoken of outside its walls. When Leo was 5, he suddenly refused to go out to the field one day. He sat quietly in a corner of the house for hours, not speaking to anyone. His mother, Celia, tried everything to coax him outside, but the child would not go out that day. By the next day, everything was back to normal, as if nothing had happened. The family never fully understood this episode. Some relatives thought it was simple childhood sensitivity, but Grandmother Celia always interpreted it differently. "He felt something that day," she would say. His body was telling him something. Years later, some would wonder whether this small, unexplained episode had been an early sign of the health condition that would slowly reveal itself in the boy's body. But at the time, no one knew. It remained simply a strange, unexplained day, tucked away in memory. By the time Leo was 8 or 9, he was playing for Grandoli, a small children's team formed in the neighborhood. His coach, Salvador Aparicio, never forgot the first time he saw him. A tiny kid walked onto the field. The moment the ball touched his foot, he went past 3 or 4 opposing players. I stopped. I watched. I couldn't believe my eyes. But during the same period, a quiet worry was growing within the family. Leo wasn't growing the way his peers were. While other children shot up in height, he remained the shortest, the slightest of build. At first, no one took it seriously. "He'll catch up," they said. But as time passed, the gap became more and more obvious. In a family photograph taken on his 10th birthday, Leo was shorter than a cousin, 3 years younger than him. Celia took her son to the doctor. Tests were run, blood samples taken, and finally, devastating news arrived for the family. Leo had a growth hormone deficiency. Treatment was possible, but expensive, hundreds of dollars a month for injections, and the treatment would need to continue for years. Jorge's insurance covered only part of the cost. Where the rest of the money would come from became a subject discussed for days, for weeks, at home. As a father, Jorge had to find a solution for his son's health and for his future. And this is where football entered the picture, because perhaps a club would agree to cover the treatment costs for such a talented child. Jorge Messi went knocking on the doors of Argentina's biggest clubs to solve his son's health problem. Scouts at River Plate's Youth Academy watched Leo and were impressed by his talent. But when it came to financial support, the club backed away. According to some accounts, the club's financial troubles at the time were to blame. Others say certain figures in management simply thought it too risky to invest so heavily in such a young child. Newell's Old Boys, the club Leo already played for, was facing similar financial constraints. In desperation, Jorge knocked on other doors, but kept hearing the same answer. The talent is there, but we don't want to take the risk. It was around this time that a connection formed that would change the family's life forever. One of Leo's relatives lived in Spain and had a personal connection to a football agent there. Through this connection, officials at Barcelona's youth academy, La Masia, began gathering information about young Leo. In September 2000, the family, or rather, Jorge and Leo, flew to Barcelona for a trial. That day, Carles Rexach, the official in charge of Barcelona's youth teams, had rushed over from another match and missed most of the trial. He only caught the final few minutes. But according to accounts, the moment he saw what Leo could do with the ball, he turned to those beside him and said, "Sign this boy immediately." At that moment, though, there was no proper contract paper on hand. Rexach reached for the only thing available, a paper napkin from a restaurant, and signed it. That napkin has become one of the most legendary documents in football history, now kept in Barcelona's museum collection. Interestingly, there are still different accounts of exactly what was written on that napkin. Some say it was a formal offer, others say it was merely a statement of intent. The details of the actual napkin have grown a little blurred over the years, buried under layers of legend, one of the story's own particular mysteries. Once Barcelona's offer became concrete, the family faced a massive decision: leave behind their life in Rosario, their home, their jobs, their relatives, and move to Spain. This was an enormous change, not just for Leo, but for the whole family. Jorge quit his job. Celia would have to leave behind her mother, her sisters, her entire life. Rodrigo and Matias would be leaving their friends and their schools behind. Their little sister, Maria Sol, was still a baby. At the start of 2001, the family settled in Barcelona. The first months were difficult. The language barrier, a new culture, and most importantly, delays in some of the financial support the club had initially promised. For several months, the family lived through great uncertainty because the contract hadn't yet been finalized. During this period, Jorge nearly considered returning to Argentina, but eventually the club kept its word, and the contract was signed. The real turning point, however, came a few months later. Celia returned to Rosario with the 3 older children. Officially, this was said to be for the children's education and to preserve the family's ties with their extended relatives back home. But the true reasons behind this separation remained for years one of the family's most private, least discussed subjects. Some close family sources said the family struggled to adjust to life in Spain, and that Celia, in particular, suffered from loneliness and homesickness. Others whispered that tensions between Jorge and Celia during this period played a role in the decision, a rumor that would gain a little more weight years later when the couple did in fact separate. In the end, 13-year-old Leo stayed behind in Barcelona with his father, Jorge. Apart from his mother, his brothers, his little sister, in a foreign city, in a foreign language, he tried to hold on to a new life with just his father by his side. La Masia was the heart of Barcelona's youth academy, an old farmhouse with stone walls and dozens of beds inside. When Leo first arrived, he was a head shorter than his peers, spoke Spanish with an Argentine accent, which some kids even mocked, and, most significantly, had to inject himself with growth hormone in his own leg every single evening. These injections weren't just a physical hardship. For a 13-year-old, having to administer a painful routine to himself every day was psychologically a heavy burden as well. His family tried to support him, but his father was often busy with work and contract negotiations. Leo never spoke in detail about the pain he felt injecting himself alone at night, but one of his roommates at La Masia would later share in an interview. "Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear him crying quietly, but by morning he'd be off to training as if nothing had happened." His coaches, too, often spoke about his silence, his withdrawn nature. "Why does he talk so little?" they would ask one another. Some thought it was simple shyness. Others recognized that being separated from his family at such a young age had left a deep mark on him. Leo was a boy who expressed his emotions not through words, but through his performance on the pitch. Yet during this period, there was another mysterious detail discussed within the family, but never fully shared with the public. It was said that during this period of loneliness, Leo secretly spent hours on the phone with his mother every single night. The content of these phone calls was never shared with anyone, but some relatives believed these conversations were one of the biggest reasons Leo managed to stay psychologically afloat. By 2003, Leo had become a name people were talking about within Barcelona's youth teams. But the real turning point came with his meeting with the era's biggest star, Ronaldinho. The first time the Brazilian star saw young Leo, he was captivated by his talent and told the club's management, "Bring this kid up to the first team." On October 16th, 2004, Leo made his official debut with Barcelona's first team. He wasn't even 17 yet when Ronaldinho brought him onto the field as a winger. The fans in the stands didn't even know who this slight, timid-looking young boy was. But within minutes, what Leo did with the ball was enough to capture the stadium's attention. The relationship that developed between him and Ronaldinho wasn't just a friendship on the pitch. The Brazilian star treated young Leo almost like a younger brother, protecting him in the locker room, helping him integrate with his teammates. Some former teammates have recounted that Ronaldinho invited Leo to dinner at his home, helping him improve his Spanish. This mentorship relationship played a critical role in Leo's development, both as a footballer and as a person. As the years passed, Leo, now known to the world as Messi, achieved some of the greatest feats in football history wearing Barcelona's shirt, Champions League trophies, La Liga titles, Ballon d'Or after Ballon d'Or. His club career reached a peak unlike anything football had seen before. But something was missing: winning a major trophy with the national team. Throughout Messi's career, Argentina repeatedly reached finals and semifinals, only to fall short every time. The 2014 World Cup final, the 2015 and 2016 Copa America finals. Each time, Messi's name was added not to the list of trophy winners, but to the list of the greatest player never to win it all. During this period, a phrase even emerged among fans and the press: Messi's curse, as if some invisible force would never let him reach a happy ending with the national team. After the 2016 Copa America final, Messi announced his retirement from the national team, only to reverse his decision later. This period was among the darkest, most uncertain of his career. Interestingly, another mysterious family detail surfaced during this period. It was known that his father, Jorge, spoke with his son for hours after these final defeats, trying to help him recover psychologically. But exactly what Jorge said in these conversations was never shared with the public. Only those close to the family said that these father-son talks were decisive in Messi's choice to return to the national team. Another important story in Messi's life was his relationship with his childhood friend, Antonella Roccuzzo. The two had met as children in Rosario. Antonella was the cousin of Messi's closest friend, Lucas. As children, they had often crossed paths at the same birthday parties, the same family gatherings, but there had been no romantic connection between them at the time. Years later, once Messi had become a famous footballer, he never failed to visit his old neighborhood and old friends whenever he returned to Rosario. It was during one of these visits that he reconnected with Antonella, now an adult. Even within the family, there are different accounts of exactly how this reunion happened and who took the first step. Some say it was a chance encounter. Others say Messi had specifically arranged the meeting. Their relationship progressed quietly and privately, far from the media's gaze. Despite being one of the most talked about people in the world, Messi always managed to keep his private life hidden. In 2017, they married in Rosario in a ceremony attended only by close family and friends. They had 3 sons: Tiago, Mateo, and Ciro. The birth of his children marked a profound turning point in Messi's life. Those close to him say that even his behavior on the pitch changed after becoming a father. A calmer, more patient Messi emerged, though no less determined. To make sure his children never lost touch with his Rosario roots, he took every opportunity to bring them to Argentina, showing them the streets where his own childhood had unfolded. Another little-known detail about his family: when Thiago, his eldest son, was born, Messi is said to have reacted with extraordinary sensitivity regarding his son's health, thinking back on the hardships of his own childhood, the growth hormone treatment, being separated from his family. Close friends say he showed an almost obsessive level of attentiveness on this subject, personally attending every doctor's checkup. In the summer of 2021, news broke that shook the football world. Barcelona announced that, due to financial difficulties, it would not be able to renew Messi's contract. Having stayed loyal to a single club for 21 years, Messi tearfully announced his departure from Barcelona at a press conference. It felt, for both Messi and the fans, less like a transfer and more like the breaking apart of a family. Transferring to Paris Saint-Germain, Messi entered what was perhaps the strangest, most foreign-feeling period of his career. In France, he never found the same sense of belonging he'd had at Barcelona, being booed by fans in some matches, constant criticism from the press, and issues with cohesion within the team made this period psychologically difficult for Messi. Those close to him said that during this time, the time he spent at home with his family became more valuable to him than anything happening on the pitch. And then, in December 2022, the world witnessed one of the most unforgettable nights in football history. In the World Cup final held in Qatar, Argentina faced France. At 35, in what would likely be his last World Cup, Messi took to the field to finally complete the one thing that had eluded him for years. The match became one of the most dramatic finals in football history. It went to extra time, then to penalties, and in the end, Argentina won. Messi had finally completed the greatest missing piece of his career. That night, Messi's family was in the stands. His wife Antonella, his 3 sons, his father Jorge, and the memory of grandmother Celia, who had once watched him from a window in that small house in Rosario years before. As the trophy was lifted, the cameras caught the tears in Messi's eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of pain, but tears of satisfaction built up over years. An interesting detail: Messi's mother, Celia, later said in an interview that she had watched that final match in Argentina with other family members, at her own home, not in the stadium, in Rosario, near the old neighborhood where her son had grown up. In a way, it was as if the story had circled back to where it began, to that small dirt field. In 2023, Messi took perhaps the most unexpected step of his career, a transfer to Inter Miami in the United States. For one of European football's biggest stars, this was seen by some as a surprising decision. But for Messi, it may have been the beginning of a new chapter, a chance to live a quieter life with his family. In Miami, his children started at a new school, and his family settled into a new home. As his career approached its twilight, Messi spoke more and more in interviews about the value of time spent with his family, more than about football itself. Those close to him say that during this period, he was trying to live the exact opposite of the loneliness he'd experienced when he first arrived in Barcelona all those years ago this time, together with his family. Without losing touch with his looking at Messi's story today, there are still many questions that have never been fully answered. If Rexach hadn't found a napkin that day, how would the story have unfolded differently? If his mother Celia hadn't returned to Argentina with the other children, if the family had stayed together, would Leo's psychological development have been different? How did those lonely years with his father shape the quiet, withdrawn, yet incredibly determined character he showed on the field? Some close family friends believe that Messi's quietness was, in fact, a result of the separation he experienced in childhood. Others say it was simply an innate character trait. The truth is probably a mixture of both, a genetic predisposition combined with lived experience. Still, one thing is certain: a small, slight boy with a growth hormone deficiency became, through his family's sacrifices, a signature on a napkin and years of patience, one of the greatest names in the history of football. And perhaps the most captivating part of this story lies exactly in those small details that were never fully explained in a dream. in a silent day, in a late-night phone call, or in a few lines written on a napkin whose exact wording no one will ever know for certain. Some stories perhaps remain more beautiful precisely because they are never fully solved. And the story of this small boy from Rosario remains one of the world's most well-known and yet most mysterious stories.